In the heart of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris River cuts through fertile plains and rugged mountains, a power once rose that would leave a mark of fear and awe across the ancient world: the Assyrian Empire. Assyria is often remembered through a single lens: brutality. Tales of kings who flayed their enemies alive, armies that left nothing but ash in their path, and rulers who declared themselves chosen by the gods. Yet behind the shadow of terror lies a far richer story, one of resilience, ingenuity, and an extraordinary capacity for organization. From humble beginnings as a cluster of small city-states around the city of Ashur, the Assyrians carved out one of history's first true empires. They expanded through relentless military campaigns, pioneering siege warfare and using psychological tactics that would terrify opponents long before swords were drawn. But at the same time, they built grand palaces, libraries, and temples that spoke of their sophistication. To speak of Assyria is to speak of contrasts: cruelty and innovation, devastation and progress, terror and culture. This documentary will take us from the birth of Assyria through its rise as a mighty war machine into its golden age, and finally to its violent downfall, before asking what legacy it left for future civilizations. So let us begin our journey in the city of Ashur, where the first seeds of empire were sown. The rise of Assyria from city-state to kingdom. In the early second millennium BCE, Assyria was little more than a modest city-state. The city of Ashur, named after the god of war and the divine protector of the Assyrians, sat on the western bank of the Tigris River. Its people were traders, merchants, and warriors, often overshadowed by their more powerful neighbors, Babylon to the south and the Hittites to the west. But what Assyria lacked in numbers, it made up for in determination. Geography played a crucial role. Unlike the fertile lands of southern Mesopotamia, Assyria's heartland was more rugged and less abundant. To survive, the Assyrians had to be disciplined, resourceful, and expansionist. Every generation pushed its borders outward, securing resources and defending trade routes. The first real turning point came under kings like Shamshi-Adad, in the 18th century BCE. He consolidated territories across northern Mesopotamia, established fortified cities, and created a system of governance where local rulers were kept under tight Assyrian control. This early foundation taught Assyria a lesson it would carry for centuries. Survival depended on strength, unity, and fear. Although Assyria's power waxed and waned over the centuries, its core identity as a warrior state was already in place. Even when foreign powers like the Mitanni or Kassites dominated the region, Assyria preserved its independence and bided its time. By the 14th century BCE, Assyria emerged again, this time stronger, more organized, and ready to challenge Babylon itself. The seeds of empire had been planted. The world was about to witness the birth of a war machine. Military power masters of war. If one word defines the Assyrians, it is warfare. The Assyrian army was the first in history to operate like a professional, standing military rather than a seasonal levy of farmers. Every able-bodied man was trained to fight, and every campaign was meticulously planned. They pioneered siege warfare. While other armies avoided fortified cities, the Assyrians developed battering rams, siege towers, and tunneling techniques to collapse walls. Their archers provided covering fire while infantry advanced behind massive shields. Their cavalry and chariots ensured that enemies could never regroup. But perhaps the most terrifying weapon of all was psychological warfare. Assyrian kings recorded in stone the gruesome fates of their enemies: impalement, decapitation, and skinning alive. These carvings were not merely propaganda, they were warnings. Entire cities often surrendered without a fight, terrified of Assyrian retribution. Yet, behind the brutality was efficiency. The Assyrians organized their armies into units, with specialized roles: engineers, cavalry, infantry, and archers. They perfected the art of logistics, ensuring supplies, roads, and communication kept their campaigns moving. In many ways, they invented the blueprint for later imperial militaries, from Rome to Persia. It was this combination of fear, innovation, and discipline that allowed Assyria to dominate the Near East for centuries. Kings and governance, the Empire of Ashur. Assyrian kings ruled not as mere monarchs but as representatives of the god Ashur himself. Every conquest was framed as a divine mission, every victory a holy duty. The Assyrians created one of the earliest systems of imperial administration. They divided their territories into provinces, each ruled by governors who reported directly to the king. Taxes, tribute, and military recruits flowed steadily back to the heartland. Roads and communication systems tied the empire together, allowing messages to travel faster than in any previous state. Notable kings shaped this system. Tiglath-Pileser III reorganized the empire in the 8th century BCE, ensuring loyalty through deportations and population resettlements. Shalmaneser III expanded Assyria's frontiers and left behind grand monuments celebrating his conquests. Sargon II built the magnificent city of Dur-Sarakin as a symbol of imperial grandeur. And then came Sennacherib, who made Nineveh the jewel of Assyria, adorning it with colossal palaces and mighty walls. Under these kings, Assyria was not just a land of warriors, but of administrators, engineers, and visionaries. Yet the same iron grip that held the empire together also bred resentment. Provinces lived in constant fear, their populations uprooted and relocated, ensuring obedience but sowing the seeds of rebellion. Culture, religion, and daily life. Though remembered for their brutality, the Assyrians were also builders, artists, and scholars. They carved massive reliefs depicting their victories, but also scenes of hunting, feasting, and religious ceremonies. Their palaces were decorated with colossal statues of winged bulls Lamassu that stood as guardians against evil. Religion was central to Assyrian identity. The god Ashur stood above all others, but they also worshipped Ishtar, the goddess of war and love, and other Mesopotamian deities. Temples were built not only as places of worship, but also as centers of political power. Daily life for ordinary Assyrians revolved around farming, herding, and trade. Families lived in mud brick houses, markets bustled with activity, and scribes kept records on clay tablets. Despite the empire's militaristic image, within its cities one could find music, literature, and even the seeds of science. One of the most remarkable achievements was the library of Ashur, containing thousands of clay tablets. It preserved myths, laws, medical texts, and astronomical observations. Thanks to this library, we know stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which would have been lost otherwise. Thus, even amid the cruelty of empire, the Assyrians left behind treasures of knowledge and culture that still shape our understanding of the ancient world. Decline and fall, the end of Assyria. No empire lasts forever. By the late 7th century BCE, cracks began to appear in Assyria's iron grip. Constant wars drained its resources, rebellions flared across provinces, and resentment among conquered peoples grew unbearable. Enemies once divided, now united. The Babylonians to the south and the Medes to the east formed an alliance determined to end Assyrian dominance. One by one, Assyria's great cities fell. In 612 BCE, Nineveh itself, the heart of Assyria, was besieged and utterly destroyed. Palaces burned, statues toppled, and the empire that had terrorized the Near East for centuries vanished almost overnight. The brutality that had sustained Assyria also ensured that no one mourned its fall. To its enemies, the destruction of Nineveh was divine justice. To history, it was the dramatic end of an empire once thought invincible. Legacy of Assyria, lessons of power. And yet, Assyria did not vanish entirely. Its military innovations influenced later empires, from Persia to Rome. Its methods of administration, provinces, governors, tribute, became the blueprint for imperial rule. Its art and architecture inspired civilizations for centuries to come. But perhaps the greatest legacy is a lesson: fear alone cannot sustain an empire. Assyria's reliance on terror secured short-term obedience, but fostered long-term hatred. The same roads that carried its armies later carried the forces of its enemies. The same palaces that celebrated victory became ruins buried in dust. Today, Assyria survives not as an empire, but as memory etched in stone reliefs, carved into clay tablets, and preserved in stories of both awe and horror.